Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark Clancy, and I am Senior Manager Community Engagement at Metrolinx, and I work on the Ontario Line subway. I will be your host for tonight's virtual open house. We are here tonight to share construction updates with you on the upcoming excavation work that will take place at the King Bathurst station that is currently under construction. And I'm just going to pause for a moment to perhaps allow a couple more guests join tonight's session. All right. Why don't we get started? So, for those of you who may have participated or attended previous meetings with Metrolinx about the Ontario Line station, particularly at King and Bathurst, we welcome you to tonight's session. If you are attending for the very first time, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to you for joining us this evening. I'm sure many of you have seen a lot of the activity at the King and Bathurst intersection at the two sites, where Metrolinx and our contractor are currently working to build the King Bathurst subway station. I will be your host for tonight. Again, my name is Mark Clancy, and I work at Metrolinx, and I'm in the Community Engagement Office for the Ontario Line subway. And if I could just go to the next slide, please. I'd like to start this evening with a land acknowledgement. So please let us take a moment to acknowledge we are on lands that have been and continue to be home to many Indigenous peoples, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat peoples. We are all treaty people. Many of us have come here as settlers, as immigrants, or involuntarily as part of the transatlantic slave trade in this generation or generations past. We acknowledge the historic and continued impacts of colonization and the need to work towards meaningful reconciliation with the original caretakers of this land. We acknowledge that Metrolinx operates on territories and lands covered by many treaties that affirm and value the rights of Indigenous communities, nations, and peoples. We understand the importance of working towards reconciliation with the original caretakers of this land. At Metrolinx, we will conduct business in a manner that is built on a foundation of trust, respect, and collaboration. Next slide, please. So I wanted to just quickly introduce tonight's speakers. So I am Mark Clancy. I'm joined tonight by my colleague, James Francis, who is the Senior Manager, Subway's sponsor at Metrolinx. Welcome, James. You will see Dante Mehay on the screen, and Dante works for the Ontario Transit Group. They are the contracting organization that is building the Ontario Line in the downtown area of Toronto. And he is the deputy station manager at King and Bathurst. We are also joined by Sarah Segden. She works at the Ontario Transit Group as well. And she is with our environmental management team at the Ontario Transit Group. So thank you and welcome to our speakers. So we do have an agenda tonight. We will provide a bit of an overview on the Ontario Line project itself. Some of you may be familiar with the project. Some of you may be joining us for the first time. So I'd like to spend just a little bit of time providing a bit of an overview on the project. We will share information about upcoming construction activities, more details about all of the excavation activity that needs to take place at the King Bathurst sites. And we do have some information that we'd like to share with the community on, methods that we are taking and the Ontario Transit Group is taking to minimize impacts to the community during construction activities. And so there will be an opportunity at the end of our presentation for you to ask questions. And if you do have a question, please keep your questions brief, one question at a time. If you do have a second question or a follow-up question, and if we have time, we will certainly come back to you. And, there may be quite a bit of information presented to you, so please write your question down. We will open the chat function. You can drop your question into the chat function, and I will give instructions on the Slido ability for you to perhaps drop any questions in there. But tonight's meeting will really focus on the construction impacts and the excavation work that is required for the King and Bathurst stations. Next slide, please. So if you do have any audio issues this evening, there is a telephone number that you can dial into. It's on your screen, and there is a code that you will be asked to enter after you dial the telephone number. So again, if you have any issues, please call the telephone number on your screen, and there's the code there for you as well. Next slide, please. So how to ask questions through text. So there's two ways that you can submit your questions to us. You can join Slido now by visiting slido.com and entering the code that you see on your screen. Or the easiest way is to scan the QR code with your phone, and it will take you to the Slido site. And you are certainly welcome to type your questions into Slido. My colleague who is joining us this evening will be monitoring any questions that come in through Slido, and we'll be able to address your questions as they come in. Next slide, please. So about the Ontario line. If we can just jump to the next slide. So I'll just spend a little bit of time here sharing information about the Ontario line. So the Ontario line is a 15.6 kilometer subway. It has 15 brand new stations along the way with trains that will run every 90 seconds during rush hour. So the Ontario line runs from Exhibition, and there's a map on your screen. So from the left, I'm going to go left to right. So Exhibition, and then you'll see it runs through the downtown area of the city, Queen and Spadina, Osgoode, Queen and Moss Park. Then we dip down to Corktown, and then we will cross over the Don River. And we will head east and then north up to Pape and Danforth, where there will be an interchange station there. And then as we get into the Thorncliffe Park, Flemington Park, Science Centre area, there's an elevated portion of the Ontario line. So the blue lines indicate it's a true subway, underground. Green lines are where we have a tunnel boring portal, if you will, a portal where tunnel boring will happen and where the trains will either enter or exit into the ground or above ground. But tonight we're really here to talk about the King and Bathurst station, which you will see in the bottom left-hand side of your screen. And we call that the south alignment of the Ontario line, and that's from Exhibition to Corktown / the Don Yard area of the project. So next slide, please. So the Ontario Transit Group is a joint venture between Ferrovial Construction and Vinci Construction Grants project, and they have been contracted to design, build, and deliver the southern portion of the Ontario line. And that contract was awarded back in November of 2022. And the scope of work for the Ontario Transit Group is to build the above ground station, And that will be integrated with the existing GO Transit exhibition station. They are building 2 underground stations, which will be integrated into the existing TTC Osgood and Queen subway stations. And they are building 4 new underground stations. So one at King and Bathurst, which is our focus for tonight's conversation, Queen Spadina, Moss Park, and Corktown. And in addition to that, there is a 6-kilometer tunnel that will be built, and that tunnel spans from Exhibition all the way over to the Don Yard, just before the Don River to the east of the Corktown site that you see on the map. All right, next slide, please. So just to give a little bit of an overview of the station location at King and Bathurst. So, where you see the blue line sort of, approaching from the bottom of the map, the subway is basically approaching from the exhibition station, and it curves up to the King and Bathurst site, where there will be a station entrance at the corner of King and Bathurst on the northeast side. And there will also be a station entrance on the south side of King and Bathurst. So the 2 sort of rectangles, if you will, demonstrate the location of the stations. And then the gray rectangular shape, that is actually the station footprint that will be below the surface. Just before we move on to the next slide, you've probably seen some of the heritage elements that from the previous location, from the previous building on the north site. That building did feature various heritage elements. Those have been retained and stored off-site, and then they will be integrated into the new station. And on the south site, part of the heritage facade remains in place, and you've probably noticed some of the metal or steel supports that are keeping that facade in place. And then that will also be integrated into the station. And I just want to add that both entrances, so the north and south stations, they do have an opportunity to be developed with a transit-oriented community, which Infrastructure Ontario is leading. And I will have more to say on that as we get through the presentation. Next slide, please. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Dante. Go ahead, Dante.
Thank you very much, Mark. Good evening, everybody. My name is Dante, and I'm the Deputy Station Manager for the King and Bathurst. I'm gonna be giving you a little bit of a overview of what is going on in that corner. So starting with the overview or the look ahead that we will have in these coming months. During the summer, we are still working on piling operations. All this activity has been done during the fall of this year. We are in about 95% completion. The North Shaft is completely done. All the piling operations in there, which include the support of excavation and the permanent foundations, and also for foundation for our shelters. Remaining piling is just on the south side of the King and Bathurst station. Now for the summer, as I mentioned, we're gonna completing this task, the piling operation. Also, we are going to start with the installation of an acoustic shelter, which is gonna be located in the north side of the station. And also the plan is to start with the excavation, one of the main activities that we will have in this summer. The excavation will go through fall and through the winter up to 2025. Next slide, please. Okay, so the start of excavation at Kingdom Bathurst. Right now, we are currently working and doing some preparatory works. We started this summer in July for the north side, which is what the one that we have in the picture. We are start getting ready, start getting all the preparation works, especially for the installation of the shelter. Which is it's going to require some coordination. Several works going to happen in there. The plan is to start with the south side, but our target right now is to pretty much be simultaneously starting the activities north and south, maybe matter of days in between. This is expected on end of August of this summer. We will go through different phases of excavation through the entire or to the rest of the year. And we will keep informed to every single one of those to the community. In regards of the working hours, the working hours will be taking place basically from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. It will be seven to 7 with potential extending hours, right, until 11 p.m. Also, we're expecting to be working some weekends from 7 to 5. This is on Saturdays, just on Saturdays. And I want to mention that for the installation of the shelter, we may need to be required to work at nights due to the um, situation of the work. This will be approximately the last portion of July. It will be just for a week. The works are planning to be from 7 to 7, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Next slide, please. Okay, so we will talk a little bit about the excavation. Over here we have a nice picture from Kingdom Bathurst that if you are walking through there, probably you are seeing that, no? The retention tower. Okay, what is excavation? Excavation can be as simple as to dig a hole in the ground, right? And we can have that. But in this particular project, this activity tends to be very complex and a lot of technicalities in this. I'm gonna try to simplify those to go to the more relevant aspects of this excavation. So basically, when we start the excavation, in this case, it's going to be for the shafts. It's going to be a vertical excavation. This excavation needs to be supported. That's the reason of the support of excavation we have been installing during this past spring. This will allow us to keep a continuous excavation without adding any additional protections, especially on the north side, until we reach the rock level. For this, we will use different types of equipment. I mean, the main one will be the excavators, but due to the situation that we have, no, in which the excavations are going to be able just to reach up to one point. We may need to be required different types of excavators and also the help of some tower cranes for this operation. Eh, as I mentioned during the excavation in the shaft, the vertical excavation, we will find two types of soils. No, one is the soft, which is already protected by the series of piles that we dig before. And also we will, whenever we reach rock, that's when we are gonna go into a sequential type of excavation in which we excavate uh, during different levels, and then we protect immediately with shotcrete. Shotcrete basically is an spread concrete, right? That is spraying into the walls of the excavation, which they will be reinforced with rock bolts, not to make it sure that to provide the stability to our excavation. That's for the north shaft. In the south shaft, which is a larger excavation than the north, in there we also will be providing the support to this stability by means of using whalers and struts. Its system will be similar to the one that you see on the picture. Next slide, please. So setup progression excavation for the north side. The preparation for the excavation is expected to start on the north side. July, tentative to August. No, this will be leading by the shelter installation. Basically, once the installation of the shelter is complete, is when we will proceed with the excavation on the north side. So is what we're currently doing, installing the shelter. So the excavation in here is basically involves the removing of surface layers using equipments and other types of excavators, I'm sorry, and other types of equipments for this, no? We will be excavating in layers. The first portion, what is covered with the SOE, if you can see in the image, is that circle. It's going to be a continuous excavation until we reach that point, and then we will encounter the rock level, and it's when we'll go into the sequential excavation by excavating around 1 to 1.5 meters or 2 meters, and then protected with the shotcrete and the rock balls I mentioned before. While we're going down in the excavation, we will be adding some stairs to provide access to our workers. And the deeper it goes, at some point we will have to have a hoist, a mechanical hoist in there. No, for safety reasons, we are adding one extra item, which is called a David arm. And basically, it's a small type of mechanical crane, no, in case an emergency may happen. I'm going to speak a little bit about the shelter installation in this case. So the shelter is going to allow us to work a little bit more continuously and to have less interruption to the public in here. Within the shelter, we will have to install a overhead crane, which is a crane that's going to be capable to fit inside the shelter. And that's going to allow us to remove all the excavated material from the bottom. Next slide, please. Okay, well, I'm going to stand a little bit on the overhead crane. The overhead crane will be delivered this July. This overhead crane is being planned to be installed on during night works. We're not expecting to have too much noise for these works. This time of frame basically can move back and forward inside the shelter. It's going through those rails that I don't know if you can see in the picture. So it allows to move back and forth, delivering materials or removing spoils. No, for the excavation in this case, this is what we're gonna use. No, the first phase of excavation on the north shaft will be through the excavators itself. No, whenever they are able to reach to the surface, it's gonna be a point in which the excavation is gonna be so deep that we will need the required different systems. In this case, it's gonna be this overhead crane. So underneath in the below picture that you have in there, you can see the beam. So this beam is gonna be lowered by the overhead crane. It's gonna be loaded inside the shaft, and then it's gonna be raised with the overhead crane to later put it not in the ground that you can see in here, but it's gonna be directly placed into the dump trucks that we're gonna have in there. No, in this case, we will minimize all the sediments that we can have in the site. Next slide, please. Okay, the shelter. Even if you see in the picture, the shelter seems like a tent, no? Something that when you go camping, you can assemble this. Well, depending on the type of tent, no? It can be within a matter of 5 minutes or 20 minutes, no? But in this case, in this shelter, it's gonna be a complex structure, no? Which is gonna be the skeleton of this shelter is gonna be a steel structure, in order to support all the potential loss that we have in there, winds, etc., etc. All this steel structure is being supported with the deep foundations on the ground, so it's going to be very, very rigid, very, very stable. After we complete the steel frame installation, later we will proceed to put the fabric, the cover on top, which is what's going to provide a little bit of not a little bit, will be provide uh, the cover that we need, not to keep the works inside, and inside this shelter, as you can see in the picture underneath, we will also install noise panels. No, these panels is the ones that are gonna allow to keep most of the noise inside our shelter. No, so the activity will be very intimate. It will be for us and trying to keep the neighborhood away from all the typical construction noises. Next slide, please. Okay, now I'm going to speak a bit about the south side. And here we have the picture of the south side. As you can see, very complex picture. This picture is what we are expecting to have in the future. No, as well, the preparation works are starting this July. Several works that we need to complete prior to start the excavation. On the south side, on the other hand, we will not have a shelter because the type or the configuration of the site will not require. In this case, it's gonna allow us to install a tower crane in order to reach all the points of the site. This site, no, this site is quite larger than the north, so therefore we will need this type of crane, no, to assist us for that. For this excavation, again, no, we start with the support of excavation, which is the series of piles that we have been installing so far. Once we start the excavation and we start reaching several defined, I would say, milestone for this, we will install in the additional stability, which is the strut and wailers. These are the beams that you can see, no, inside the hole. These are transverse beams, and they're going to be surrounded by a perimeter beam, also, no, being called the wailer. This will add additional stability to our excavation. This job is quite large, so it will take us part of the rest of the year, basically, to give the excavation and part of the following year. So for this one, again, not the first procedure, the first lifts of the excavation. The methodology is to use simple equipment, simple excavators, which they're going to be they're going to try to excavate the material and deposit in the surface, no, until it's impossible to reach. Then we will switch the type of excavator. In this case, we will bring an excavator called telescopic excavator, which has the capability to go down deeper by extending the arm. It's gonna start. It's gonna be able to start reaching material, but this excavator also has a limit, right? And it's when we will switch again our methodology. In this case, we will use the tower crane and the beam, no, that was shown before, no, in order to load all the trucks. Next slide, please. The tower crane that is going to be installed on the south side. The plan for this tower crane right now, the installation of this tower crane is planned to be around September, end of September, beginning of October. The tower crane that you can see in the picture, this one is called hammerhead type because of the shape of it. In our case, we will be using a tower crane that is called a luffing crane. The big difference between these two is that the one in the picture is kind of rigid. No, I mean, it just turns around with the boom of the arm being at the same distance all the time. No, the advantage of the luffing crane is that it's going to allow us to rise and lower the arm or the boom. So this is going to allow us not to fly over the sidewalk, no, which is going to be comfortable for all the pedestrians, no, not have to have a crane on top of his head, no. So I think this is good for the project and for the public itself, no. Also, by doing this, we will avoid to having fly over any adjacent building, no. So keeping all the works within our site. So the delivery of this crane is gonna have to be through several loads because, as you can see, it's a large piece of equipment. Mainly these loads are going to be delivered in the morning to avoid being impacting by the traffic, and in this way also not to have impacts to the traffic. No, we're expecting to have the trucks delivering within 2 days, and most likely another week, we'll say it, or less than that, to complete the installation of this crane. Next slide, please. Okay, this is, I guess, a very interesting topic. Now, what to expect in the community? So, during the excavation works, community members can expect the following. So, delivery of equipment, including machines, as part of the preparation works. Some noise from excavators, loading of the excavating material, deliveries of the steel beams, and in this case, the struts and boilers for the soft shaft. A shotcrete is suspected, which is going to be pumped by. That's going to be the way to be spread, no? Also, the equipment used during this operation includes drilling machines, cranes, excavators, concrete pumps, and concrete trucks on site. Several trucks entering and leaving the work site daily. Following these trucks are going to be following a specific route. No, is what we call our whole route, right? So they're not gonna be all over the place. No, they're gonna be following a specified route that we have for these trucks. Uh, Short-term link closures. In this case, it's gonna be just for delivery large pieces of equipment. This what meaning short-term link closures, we may be talking about 10, 15 minutes, no more than that. Um, and this is in order to keep the workers and the community safe, no? While we're doing this operation. Next slide, please. Reducing impacts to the community. Okay, so what we are doing in order to reduce the impacts to the community. Access points. On the north side, we will have two gates. One gate is going to be located on the north side of King Street. King Street, I will set the westbound. Most of our trucks are going to be entering through there and exiting through Bathurst. No, this is going to provide continuous circulation of the trucks, not to avoid any backing of the trucks. And at the south side, the trucks, the south side is a little bit more complex. We will have one entrance, which will be in the corner of Bathurst and Stewart. But depending on the facing of our excavation, we may use different exits. No, one is going to be located on the north side, one is going to be located on Bathurst, and one is going to be located at the south of Stuart. As of now, the south of Stuart will be one of our main exits, but depending on the situation of the whole roads and the sequence of works, we may be switching. The exit at Bathurst, it will be an alternative that from time to time we may need to use, but it's not expecting as of now to be one of the main exits, no? But as I said, from time to time you will see some vehicles getting out from there. Of course, no, every exit will be covered by our flaggers that if you have been on site, you have been noticing them, how they extend some barriers, no, in order to show the pedestrians not to keep going, no, and to keep them safe. Next slide, please. Construction site plans and traffic and pedestrians. So all sidewalks and bike lanes will remain open. I guess this is really good news. Pedestrians will continue to use the sidewalks along the work zone. Parking lane on Stuart Street will continue to be closed. These parking spots were just south of our site. It was like a 3 spaces, and this one are gonna keep being closed for a long period of time, no? During our project, during excavation, and during the construction itself of the station. In there, what we did is that we extend the sidewalk into the curb lane, so the pedestrians are gonna have the free pass to the curb lane. No, all roads will remain open. We don't expect any long-term closures now. This will be most likely probably at the very end of the project when we are working on the landscape. No impacts to the public transit. We don't expect any impacts to TTC access at the intersection of King Street and Battle Street, and we're expecting that these services will be uninterrupted, not during the construction. And as a friendly reminder for the members of the public, not to be mindful and to follow the directions of the flag persons on site, no, when crossing and accessing the points, we will appreciate a lot that. Because at the end, our flaggers are working for your safety. No, I will say the same thing, no, to the motorists, right? To all the drivers in there. No, when they see a flagger, I will respectfully literally ask to give us a break. Huh? So that will be very appreciated by our flaggers, and is in order to provide safety to all of us. Next slide, please. Minimizing impacts with the community. So reduce impacts to the residents and business in the area. Mitigations will be in place, including air quality monitoring to track airborne emissions to ensure the construction activities don't impact the quality of the environment. Continuous loop trucks routes, reducing the needs of trucks to reverse using the backup alarms. So basically, our trucks are gonna get in through one door and exit through a different one to avoid any reversing. The street sweepers and wheel cleaning as needed, not to ensure the soil and sediment is kept off the city streets and sidewalks. If you have been in our area, you most likely have noticed that we have this sweeper continuously working inside, not to keep the area clean. In addition, we were planning to install a hard surface within our stations. The can be either concrete or asphalt. This is to completely minimize carry out of sediment into the streets. Next slide, please. Monitoring the noise vibration levels, utilizing sound meters and real-time monitoring system to track and control noise and vibrations emissions to help minimize disturbance to the community and ensure project regulations and compliance. No, so we have these devices installed in strategic points in our system. These devices are continuously sending us information to us, no? And whenever they detect something that is a bit above the requirements or the limits, it's been sent an alarm directly to several people on OTG, several departments, which we immediately trying to tackle, no, trying to identify the source and mitigate it as soon as possible. We have the site hoarding. This is allow us to reduce noise. We also have noise and vibration monitoring devices placed on site in the placed on the site and also in the neighborhood for tracking the activities, no, and the impacts that we have to the ambience. Also, these devices send us alerts, no, to several staff of the OTG team. And I guess one, no, I guess I believe this is one of the, I will say, one of the biggest uh, things to minimize, no, the impacts is the acoustic shelter, right? Which will significantly reduce the noise, the visibility, and also the the dust, no, that they may be generated. Next slide, please. So dust suppression. The suppression will be effectively managed through our site. The use of the following mitigations. No, well, the mud mats is more for the carry on of sediment. As of now, we have to use these mud mats because we have not yet installed the platform with the concrete or asphalt. So these mud mats, which you can see in the above picture, in the picture on the top, they basically trying to capture all the sediment, no, that is in the tires of the vehicles that are exiting. No? We require a continuous maintenance of these ones in order to keep them in good shape. For the dust control, the plan that we have is to start using the water suppression, no, assist by regularly moisturizing exposed soils and debris, so preventing those particles from becoming airborne. Now, for the excavation, based on some experiences that we have with the subcontractors or other staff, uh, the excavation, we're expecting that the soil can be wet, no? So this will help to not to generate any dust while we're excavating. We are expecting to find more dry situation maybe whenever we reach the rock, but for that situation, whenever we start encountering the dust, we will have this water suppression system, not to assist minimize all the dust in there. And again, no, the acoustic shelter, which soon you guys will be able to see this in the north side of our site. Next slide, please. And I think I'm gonna pass the microphones to my colleague Mark Clancy.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you so much, Dante. That was great. A lot of information. And just a quick reminder for anyone that would like to ask a question. I know I've seen a couple of questions come in through Slido already, and that's great. We will get to those questions in a moment. But again, if you do have questions, you can submit them by Slido. Scan the QR code that you see on the screen there, or you can go to slido.com and enter the code that's presented on your screen. And I believe we will also open up the chat function here in the Teams meeting. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat here. And perhaps we'll just go to the next slide quickly. All right. If you do want to ask your question, like I said, you can type it into the Slido, or you can raise your hand, and there is a hand function at the very top of your screen. You'll see it at the very top. You just click on raise your hand. The meeting organizer, we will unmute you, and then you will need to still unmute yourself. So I'll just do a gentle reminder to anyone that has their hand up to also unmute yourself. And if you are on your phone, again, you will see on the screen here some instructions on how to raise your hand if you're calling on your mobile device, and you will be placed into the queue. And again, I will be able to unmute you, and you will still be required to unmute yourself as well. I know that was a lot of information, so I'm going to just dive into some of the questions now that we have already received on Slido. We've got some really great questions, so thank you for that. In the meantime, if anyone else has questions they want to drop into the chat function on this particular meeting, Bradley, if you could just open the chat for us, then folks can enter their questions there. So just moving over to a couple of the Slido questions. So the first question that came in was, will blasting be necessary for excavation? And the answer to that question is no. There is no blasting to get that bedrock out of the site. So you don't need to worry about that activity. The next question was, how much will the acoustic shelter reduce the noise? And there was another question about the acoustic shelter that came in that I'd also just like to quickly address before we talk about the reduction in sound from the acoustic shelter. So if I can just get my colleague to go back to one of the previous slides where we show the north site where the acoustic shelter will be in place. because I think this picture will give us a good indication of what's happening there. So next, another slide up, further up, where there, I think there was a picture of the buildings within close proximity of the site. Couple more. While we're looking for that slide, so yeah, this slide is fine. So so on this particular site, the north site, this is where the acoustic shelter will be in place. And as Dante indicated, this site is a very sort of smaller site, very contained. And the hours of operation here are daytime hours, and there will be some early evening and overnight hours for this particular location as well. And at this site, because we're really constrained and there's buildings, a condo building that goes around this particular site, we cannot install a crane tower with an arm that would extend over the site to, you know, to allow us to do what we need to do. So on this particular site, the acoustic shelter will fit and it will work here. And this is the first time we're using this type of acoustic shelter in the GTA, but the acoustic shelter has been used in many other places around the globe, such as the UK. And I think there's been a few other places around the world, such as Sydney and in New Zealand. So there is some experience out there globally, and we're bringing that acoustic shelter to this north site. And then I'm going to ask my colleague Sarah to just talk about what are the how does the acoustic shelter reduce the noise levels on this particular site? Sarah?
Yes, thanks, Mark. So hi, everyone. For the acoustic shelter, first of all, it's a great environmental mitigation that has been carefully designed and modeled to help contain a great amount of noise and also dust. You have to think of it like an enclosure, I would say, of multi-layers of materials that have been specifically chosen and carefully chosen for their sound absorbing capacities. So our current modeling, it suggests that the range of decibel of reduction will be between, I would say, 25 and 45, depending on the frequency of equipment in decibel. So it will be have a great impact on the community. I can speak to that because I personally lived near to acoustic shelters in Paris when they were doing Metro Line works, and it really changed, the quality of life, I will say, in my house. So I'm positively, hopeful that this will have a great impact on the community while the works are ongoing. Hopefully I answered your question.
That's great. Thank you for that, Sarah. Really appreciate that. So we do have another question in the meeting chat from Nikki. And Nikki, thank you so much for your question. Seriously concerned about not having an acoustic shelter on the southeast side. How will the noise be managed, especially considering the extended working hours? What about the spell of fuel or the smell of fuel and dust in the air already present? And that's a really great question, Nikki. And maybe what I'll do is just ask Sarah to speak a little bit about some of the monitoring, the noise and vibration monitoring that will be in place at both sites, but particularly the south site that you are concerned about, Nikki. So maybe Sarah, I'll turn it over to you to respond to that question.
Yes, sure. Hi, Nikki. So to specifically answer your question, here we have in the north shaft an acoustic shelter that has been designed mainly because of the hours of operation that are planned. On the south shaft, however, we will have daytime activities, but we are choosing our mitigation on a more, I would say, proactive approach we are working very closely with our designers, with the means and methods, and with the construction team, with the inputs and the equipment that we have, the hours of operations, to specifically, I would say, design the mitigations to be below, I would say, the thresholds of noise and vibration on this side. And should we approach the threshold during the operational phase, we do have real-time monitoring that is recording in real time the exceedances should they have, and we are starting working on it on a real-time basis directly with the construction team and the environmental team closely to understand what did we do differently, I will say, and what is the root cause of this exceedance. And we are working up and on it with the site team directly. So on this more, I would say, reactive approach, we are prepared. Of course, we have this modeling that try to, I would say, avoid as much as possible the exceedances. But if we approach these thresholds, we are working closely with the construction team to, try to mitigate it as much as possible.
Thank you, Sarah. Really appreciate that update. And again, Nikki, thank you so much for your question. I hope that answered your question. And I do want to go back over to the Slido for one moment. There was another question asked about where is the south portal going to be exactly? And so I can respond to that question. So I'm just going to bring us all to the intersection of, yes, so if you look at the map here on your screen, down in the lower left side, you'll see exhibition station, and there's a green sort of line there, and that green line indicates the location of the portal. So from a street, geographical area, if you can imagine being at Strawn, at the intersection of Strawn and East Liberty Street, just south of that area, there is an existing GO train rail corridor. And the tunnel, the portal, will be built within that particular location. So there's a small street off of East Liberty Street called Pirandello. It's a dead-end street. And in that area is where the tunnel boring portal will be built. So it's not going to be at the King and Bathurst area, but closer to the exhibition station. All right. Helga, thank you so much for your question there, and thank you for joining us this evening. I'm just checking to see if there are any other questions coming in. If anyone does have a question, please feel free to raise your hand, and then we can unmute you to ask your question as well. I know there was a lot of information presented tonight, so we will be posting this presentation online. And if anyone does have any questions after tonight's session, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. I think we have a screen, a page later on in the presentation with our contact information, and we'll share that just before we wrap up tonight's session. But we've got about 5 minutes left, and we'll just pause for a moment to see if anyone has any questions that they'd like to present to us this evening. And if not, that is definitely okay. Maybe we can just go to the contact us slide, please, Garrick. And I'm happy to share how you can contact us. If you do have further questions, you can email us at the ontarioline@metrolinx.com. We do have a 24/7 telephone number that is up in operation, and that number is 416-202-5100. And you can call that number 24 hours a day if you do have a question or a concern about any activity that's taking place at the King and Bathurst sites. We do have a newsletter. If you would like to subscribe to that, you can reach out to us at metrolinx.com/Ontario line. And I do see a hand up. Ingrid, please go ahead and unmute yourself. Ingrid, can you hear us? You might still have to unmute yourself, Ingrid. Okay, please go ahead, Ingrid, if you can unmute yourself. Oh, please check Slido. Okay, let's do that. Thank you, Ingrid. Bradley, do you see the question in Slido? Yep.
Yep, one moment.
Thank you, Bradley. How much notice will be given to residents of overnight work? What is the communication plan? Great question, Ingrid. Thank you for raising that. So there's a few ways that we provide notification to residents about overnight work. We do send out notices, community notices electronically. So if you do want to sign up for those notices, please reach out to us at ontarioline@metrolinx.com. We also send out our notices through Canada Post because we know there's a lot of condominiums and apartments and businesses in the area. And so we utilize Canada Post to make sure that notification gets out to the appropriate residents. And for overnight work, we like to provide as much information and as much advance time as we can. However, there may be instances where, you know, for whatever reason, emergency work needs to take place, or, you know, weather or other incidents prohibit us from giving advance notice. But we'd like to give the community 1 to 2 weeks notice for any overnight work that's taking place. But thank you for your question, Ingrid. And also, if anyone does subscribe to the Ontario Line newsletter, we do include information on all of our construction activities across the project, and you will always find the community notices in the newsletter. And I'm just checking to see if there are any other hands up. I'm sorry you weren't able to ask your question there, Ingrid, but I'm glad we were able to answer your question through Slido. Any other questions? Any other? All right. I mean, it's 2 minutes to 8, and I don't want to keep anybody longer than tonight's session. So I do, on behalf of Metrolinx and my colleagues at the Ontario Transit Group, I do want to extend a great thank you to you for attending us this evening to talk about the excavation activities that will be happening at the King and Bathurst sites. If you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, and we will answer your questions and get back to you with more information very, very quickly. So once again, thank you so much, everyone, and have a great night.